is neither right nor wrong. Reality exists. It has the quality of being, which is the supreme quality of life.
Open your mind, hope and find what's needed. Defiance is freedom in this new world alliance we breathe in. And heathenism is just feeding the system. Don't define yourself by your leisures. Phonemes align in my dome as I speak them. Like those times I make silence in speeches. No nines in my precincts. No time for these pieces. Soma blinds and impeaches. Reach for the island where moksha.
You are not the doer. Being the doer is the main knot, if not one of the main knots, one of the main riddles that must be unraveled. Being the doer is the beginning of all our problems, and it's the last knot to be unraveled. It's the last obstacle. It's the great death. And the knot that I am the doer of all my actions, this knot maintains your sense of individual existence. But there's no such thing as an individual existence. There is only one existence. There's no individual existences. There's only one life, one essence, one being, one consciousness, one presence. There is no you, there is no I. And so what comes with the sense of doership is the implication that I have free will. And the opposite of free will is determinism. And free will and determinism are opposed against each other. And this dichotomy only exists in words. It's not actually in reality when it is examined. For instance, if my choice is being determined by factors that I cannot change, then my choice by definition is determined and I do not have free will. But when people say they have free will, if we look at that, it is my choice is not determined. And this is what they call free will. But a choice that is not determined is actually completely random and it's chaotic. Meaning it's not determined by anything. You're saying it's actually free. Meaning it's not determined by your your rational thought, not by your intellect, not by your preferences, not by your goals, not by your knowledge. You're saying it's basically just a flip of a coin. So when people say that they have free will or they are the doer of their choices, this is not what they actually mean. So you see the dichotomy of free will. Free will doesn't even stand on its own because nobody says their choices or what they choose is completely random. So this is not what people mean when they say free will. So what is meant by free will is that the choice is determined by other factors, but it is only determined by factors with which I identify myself with. My choices are determined by my thoughts, and I identify with my thoughts, and I am my thoughts, so I have free will. This is the knot that must be unraveled, which we will see shortly. And we will look in it or at it deeply and intellectually and rationally. Because this is a fundamental error of why the belief in free will appears or is believed to be of my or an I that is doing. So that's why it is imperative to know what you are or know God. Because once realized, this illusion or ignorance falls away. So when one identifies with their thoughts and believes they are their thoughts, They believe they have free will. But this sense of free will is still completely determined by the causations and the patterns that govern the unfolding of thoughts. So even free will, as it will be seen, is fully determined. And I'll make a claim here and now. I wanted to make it at the beginning, but it completely slipped my mind, that nothing created has free will, has a will of its own. This is not to deny the fact that we have a sense or an appearance of free will. That's obvious that all of us have a sense of free will. Just like a mirage in the desert, you have an appearance of water. So I cannot deny that appearance of water. But when we investigate that mirage in the desert, which is the appearance of water, when we investigate it closely, we will see that it is just an appearance. It is not what it actually appears to be. In the same way, in life, we have the sense of free will. If I want to raise my hand, I say I raise my hand. But me raising my hand was determined by me having a talk right now about free will. So it was determined by the talk, and this talk was determined by other factors, and so on and so forth. So as long as one believes he is his thoughts, he is his body, as long as you operate in the network of time, space, and causation, which is to say, the created, to say you are free to have will is nonsense. In this network of time, space, and causation, all is under strict law. Every thought, every feeling is caused. Everything is determined, even free will. Like I said, you did not choose to have what you call free will. It was determined upon you. So how does free will come about? And I have said this before in another video. You were not born when you were a baby, and we'll see. When a baby is born, does a baby have free will? Ask yourself this question. Does the baby will himself? Does he choose to go to the mother's breast for milk? Does he choose at 6 months to begin crawling? Does he choose at 9 months to begin walking? Or are these all just happenings of life? Life happening through this organism. And us, being of age, believe we have free will, so we say, yes, it's the baby's free will. But is life just happening when the baby cries, when he smiles? Or is he willing these things? Ask yourself the question. Because the baby has no sense, I am the doer of any of these. Yet all these are happenings. Because in essence, life is a happening. By something beyond the created. So when does a baby begin to get this sense of free will? See, the baby has no idea that it is willing anything until this sense of an I comes about the age of 3 or a little less than 3, where the baby begins to identify something in the mind. The thinking mind begins to say, which is called the ego, I am the doer of my actions and the other is the doer of their actions. This only comes about at about the age of 3, and it's a natural process. This is when you were actually born, when this sense of I came about, where you start identifying with your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, as if it's yours. Because before that, life was doing it. It was all a manifestation of life. But when life brings about this sense of an ego, all of a sudden this ego takes control over these actions and says, I am the doer of these actions. And this is when you, the person you believe yourself to be, was born. So at the level of the Creator, there can be no such thing as free will. But at the level of pure being, or at the level of universal consciousness, or at the level of God as a whole, of course there is free will. Because at the level of God, or being, that is all there is. So nothing can happen that is determined by a factor outside of God. So when you don't identify with your ego or the sense of I that comes about and claims possession over actions, thoughts, and feelings, and you lose this sense, and you identify with pure consciousness as a whole, existence as a whole, then you will see everything happens as it has to happen. Because it is determined, and everything happens as you, the all, or you, the universe, or you as the indivisible, wants it to happen. See, at the level of pure being or God, what happens is what is needed, and what is needed is what happens. Things only get confused when separation is seen as real. We are not doing life. Life is doing us. See, life creates the body in a particular way, a particular fashion, for a particular destiny. So the actions or expression you express, which you, the body, mind, organism, expresses, is just the fruit of a particular organism you were created to be at every and any particular moment. Nothing happens by chance. Nothing is even imperfect in the universe. Everything happens as it is supposed to happen. The problem only arises when we take or identify ourselves with our body and mind and believe we have complete control over our actions, and we believe we are the doer of these actions. And this happens because the mind doesn't understand that life is happening and there is no I doing life. So let's look into this free will and destiny dichotomy, because actually they're one and the same thing, and we'll see that shortly. But when one says, I have the freedom of choice or decision making, what is your decision based on? And I think the best explanation of this is I heard from a teacher named Ramesh. And he said if you investigate this deeply and sincerely, what your decisions are based upon, you will find out that you always base your decisions upon your programming. That is two factors, basically. Your genes, meaning your biological structure that you were born with, and your conditioning, which from the moment of birth, moment by moment, you are conditioned by outside influences. These two things, he says, determine your choices or what your decisions are based upon. So your DNA, your biological makeup, you had no decision in. It was determined upon you, your body, your biological organism. And your conditioning, meaning what country you were born in, what city, what status, what level of poverty or wealth you were born into. Your conditioning growing up, what your parents taught you, what your education taught you, what your peers taught you, what you learned through sight, sound, smelling, tasting, and touching. All these are outward influences that condition you, that you had no control over. So if you have no control over your biological organism, and you have no control or freedom of choice over your up-to-date conditioning. Moment by moment, you are conditioned. And depending on your conditioning and your biological organism in each moment is dependent on how you will react in that current situation. If you have no control over those two things, what makes you think you have the control over the decision being made? You have no control over what you were taught by your parents. You have no control over what you learned from family members, from school, from your experiences. So your genes and your conditioning are the basis on which decisions are made. And so are either of these two factors in your control? If you are honest about it, you will say you have no control over your genes and your conditionings, which shape you and shape your decisions. So your free will, what you call free, is based on factors which you do not control. So who made your genes and your conditioning? You didn't, so who did? God did. Or life, if you don't like the word God. Life did. So whatever you think is your will is really whose will? Life's will or God's will. All actions that are undertaken by all beings at the physical, mental, intellectual level are all determined by, are all governed by, are all decided by your inherent tendencies based on your genes and up-to-date conditioning. And people who still believe they have free will, I was talking to a brother not too long ago about free will. And it's not that we do not have free will. We have free will. We have the appearance of free will. But that appearance is not what it seems. That appearance of free will is also God's will. But when we do not understand that and we believe we are solely the doers of our action, thoughts, and feelings, we also believe the other is the doer of their thoughts, feelings, and actions. And this leads to an attitude to the flow of life and the flow of God's will, of my doing and their doing. And this idea leads to separation, which I am a separate individual entity as well as the other is a separate individual entity that has complete will over their thoughts and actions. And all suffering is based on this misunderstanding. Because when one does something to you, you are angered at that person for doing something to you. And thus you think it was his will and you want to get back at him for doing that. Not only that, when we do things, we tend to blame ourselves and blame the other. With this false sense of independent free will comes suffering, comes judging, comes blaming, comes guilt, pride. All these things come with this sense of free will. So when something happens to us, we are forced to burst into anger and blame because we believe it was the action of another person and not the happening of life itself. In each moment, moment to moment, life is happening. It's not a doing, not anyone's doing. I remember reading a philosopher named Nietzsche, and he said, when lightning strikes a cow, we understand that as a happening. We don't blame the cloud for striking a cow dead. We never place blame on that because we see it as a happening. But all things, all organisms, all beings are nature itself, moved and governed by God's will or cosmic law, however you would like to put it. So just as the cloud striking the cow dead is a happening, everything that occurs through our bodies and mind are happenings. They're just as impersonal as the storm. And when this understanding deepens within us through observation in our own experience, this understanding brings about more peace in life, because that's the purpose of any spiritual system, is to bring peace in your everyday life. The way life flows will continue to happen. There will be pleasure and pain because that's the flow of life, pleasure and pain. But there will be peace in all situations. And the sense of personal doership brings about this pride, and it removes us from our natural state, our birthright, which is peace, heaven, whatever you want to call it. Personal doership, in the sense that I am the personal doer and the other is the personal doer, burdens us with hatreds and pains and judgments and blames and guilts, not only for ourselves, but also for others. This is why Paul said in Corinthians, I believe the 4th chapter, maybe the 7th verse, he says, why boast in things that you have received? What do you have that you haven't received? As I said, you received your biological organism called the body, and you receive daily conditioning moment by moment. Even this video will condition you, either for understanding or for an argumentative perspective to go against it. Every moment by moment, life conditions you, which you have no control over. And so Paul said, you would have received everything. So why do you boast in these things when everything you have received? What can you name that you have not received? But we miss these spiritual concepts and we boast. Again, all spiritual books tell you to give God the praise. But if I'm the one who wills my own actions, why do I not get praise? Why must I give God the praise? Because your free will is actually God's will disguised. And so that's why one who understands gives God the glory. Just read any enlightened being, any master, if there are masters. I mean, these are just concepts in life. But if you ask Jesus of the New Testament, a person called him good. He said, why do you call me good? He said, only God is good, meaning it's not me. He said this many a time, it's not me, but it's God in me doing the work. Ask any enlightened being, they will say the same thing. It is not me. But the unenlightened all say it's me, showing you that you're missing something. So once it is seen that all is a movement of life, all is a movement of God's will, not my will, but thy will be done, the internal story of blame, praise, pride, guilt, regret will all begin to fall away. We are all doing, or all is happening according to life's design and life's input. So some will ask, well, how do we live life then? Well, live as if you have free will, knowing deep down that your free will is nothing but God's will. It's two sides of a coin. All opposites are like this. They're two sides to one coin. Free will on the one side of the coin and destiny on the other side of the coin. And even this is transcended in truth. Because the mind has an either or operation about it. It's either I have free will or I don't. This is how the mind operates. But truth transcends both I am not the doer or I am the doer. Truth is beyond both, meaning all are just a happening. There is no I doing and there is no I not doing. It is all just a manifestation, a happening of the divine. And ask yourself, to the ones who believe they have quote unquote free will, how do you choose anything if you didn't create your own body? If you don't create your own conditioning, if you don't create your brain, you don't even create your interest, you don't create your needs, you don't create your concerns, you don't create your abilities, can you think your next thought? Do you control or create or choose how to feel? Do you choose when to be hungry and not to be hungry? Can you choose your obsessions or your compulsions? This reminds me of a story in the Mahabharata, an Indian epic, where Krishna, the embodiment of the Godhead in the flesh, is speaking to Duryodhana, who is a warrior of a family who's going to war with the other side of the family. And Krishna asks Duryodhana, why are you doing this? Do you not know what you're doing is evil? And Duryodhana said, you don't have to tell me, and I'm just putting them in my own words. He said, you do not have to tell me what is good and what is evil. I know what is good and what is evil. He said, but there's something deep in me which compels me to do evil or to do this evil. And I am not compelled to do that which is good. So he had the sense of good and evil, and he knew what he was doing was evil. But it was something in him that moved him towards that. He did not choose that. This reminds me of how when I was growing up, I used to wonder, how do people go to war? Because it's not instilled in me to go to war and to die over material things. It wasn't instilled in me. And so I used to be at awe at how people would want to go to war. It's instilled in them. That's why they are warriors. Because it was ingrained in their genes, in their up-to-date conditioning to do that. It was not instilled in me. Nobody has a choice in these things, a choice to be a doctor or a painter. How is a painter a painter? It was instilled in him through his genes and up-to-date conditioning, moment by moment. This is how you have a variety of occupations and passions in the world. Not because they chose to do it. It's inherent in these things. These are how choices are made, by your inherent tendencies through your body-mind organism and your up-to-date conditioning, which neither of those you have control of. So some will say, well, if all is God's will, then I can go do anything. It's God's will for me to kill you. Well, you have to ask yourself, is it really in you to do that? And if it is in you to do that, to kill me, well, it's also God's will for you to go on the run from the law or go to prison for life. That's also in God's will. And again, that reminds me of a story. That I heard from a Sufi teaching. And the Sufi teaching went like this. There was a man that stole some fruit from a tree, and the owner reprimanded him, saying, "This is unlawful. Do you not fear God?" And the man replied, "Why should I? The tree belongs to God, and I am God's servant, eating the fruit from his tree." And the owner picked up a stick and started beating him. And the man yelled, "How can you treat me like this? Do you not fear God?" And the owner replied, "Why should I? You are a servant of God. This stick that belongs to God is being used to strike God's servant." So this goes to show you, this is why these type of teachings will not spread to the masses at one point, because the masses, still being in their sense of an individual I, will misuse these teachings to go do evil. But this shows you that even if you do that, and the only reason you would do it is if it is your programming, meaning a combination of your genes and your up-to-date conditioning, then you would also have to reap the recompense from these actions. So operate as if you have free will, knowing deep down that all is God's will, as the Bible states. A man believes he conceives a thought in his heart, or a man conceives in his heart, but it's the Lord that directs his steps. Every spiritual system tells you that all is God's will. No man can go against God's will. It is ingrained in him through his biological organism and his day by day, moment by moment experiences of life. So it is also said in the Bhagavad Gita, which is a Hindu text. It says this in the 3rd chapter and the 27th verse of the Bhagavad Gita, that all actions are performed by the gunas of Prakriti, which is the attributes of life, of nature. It says, deluded by identification with the ego, a person thinks, "I am the doer." But the illumined man or woman understands the domain of the gunas and is not attached. Such people know that the gunas interact with each other. They do not claim to be the doer. This is basically saying that life happens, and our ego identifies with a certain part of life and claims it is the doer. This is what must be surrendered in the Mohammedan tradition to the will of God, your will. This is what must be surrendered and sacrificed in the Christian tradition by not my will but thy will. This is what is seen through in the Hindu tradition. The sense of a self, the sense of a doer, and be at peace with all that is happening, because you in all that happens are not different. In essence, you are one and the same. And so when you see this, you begin to align with life, align with the source, and align with his will. So the obvious question would be, well, how can I get in line with this thing you're calling God's will? And the obvious answer is that no one can acquire it. No one can achieve this kind of acceptance about God's will unless it is God's will itself. But you can take pleasure in the fact that seeking this peace of mind has already happened for the mere fact that you are hearing these type of teachings. And it's only by the grace of life, the grace of the divine, that you are even driven towards these type of understandings. And the only way it will deepen in you is if you go beyond someone telling it to you. You must see it in your own experience. Only then will it deepen and harden and crystallize and be seen as truth and not a mere intellectual understanding. And so This will be the end of You Are Not the Doer. Shalom.